It's an exciting time to be in supply chain. Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation because particularly when the themes align without there being any pre-planning, so I might draw on some of your examples if that's okay. But yeah, it's an exciting time. There are a lot of options and opportunities that we didn't have before, which means there's a real opportunity to get it right. But excitement is a very close relative of fear. And excitement can tip into fear if it gets to be a little too exciting. So on the other side of the coin of opportunities and option, there's complexity and risk. So in as much as there's an opportunity to get it right, there's also an opportunity to get it a bit more wrong, perhaps than there once was as well. So we'll have a look at some of those changes that are impacting supply chains today and where we can find additional sources of competitive advantage where we might not have in the past. But before I drill into the specifics, I just wanted to talk about a couple of, I guess, high-level points that are impacting today's supply chains. One is just the number of us running around. So I came across this in a National Geographic a few years ago. And it was just one of those pictures that really struck me because what you're seeing down here in the lower left-hand corner is what the estimated global population was 1 AD. So at the height of the Roman Empire, there were about 200 million people on the planet, estimated. So if you kind of move along about 1,800 years to 1800, we get to 1 billion people, okay? Now, if you have a look at what happens between 1800 and 1930, is we get another 1 billion people, or a doubling of the population in 130 years. Then between 1930 and 1974, 1930 and 1974, it doubles again with another 2 billion people, this time 44 years. Some of you are starting to look nervous. That's kind of what happened to me when I started to look at this. And then what we're seeing now is another doubling between 74 and estimated in 2024, another doubling up to 8 billion people. Okay, so there's some people alive that have seen the population increase by a factor of 4 in their lifetime. So that's unprecedented. And on top of that, there's a whole lot more wealth than there used to be, and there's a whole lot more consumption. So just have to think about what happens with product life cycles these days. Okay. So I think what this highlights is that the scale of the supply chains are increasing quite markedly. They're getting larger, longer, more complex, more fragmented as well. We've heard Mido speak to that in his presentation this morning. But to me, this calls into question the amount of infrastructure and resource requirements it takes to support this. Think about the health systems. And for me, there's a whole piece around corporate social responsibility because, another question someone asked once was, when you see a graph go like that, what usually happens? Right. Yeah. So I think it's real. I wasn't going to mention this, but for some reason I feel called to say it. I was watching it was a Nature documentary a number of years ago. And in the documentary, what it said was that most living systems consume, to basically acquire a calorie of energy to sustain life, they expend close to a calorie of energy. So it was like 0.95 or something like that. So what that said to me is there was a high level of efficiency built into nature. And the margin was quite thin. The survival margin was quite thin. If you look at what we do, we actually use 10 calories to consume 1. Now that's also because we found a way to convert stored solar energy in the form of petroleum and so on into energy. So there's some technology that supported that. But again, it's just something we need to be aware of as we move into the future, again, around corporate social responsibility and the fact that we do live in a global community. Another change is the amount of data that's being generated, because not only there are billions and billions of us running around, but we're running around with our devices, liking things, taking photos of things, taking selfies, writing reviews, ordering things online, doing searches, looking at the ASCI conference app right now, trying to figure out when I'm off and when the tea break starts and that sort of thing. So what's happening is we're accumulating like a vast ocean of data, and it's not only the volume of the data, but it's the level of granularity. And this was also something I scanned from a National Geographic article. The little dialogue bubbles are predictions that MIT labs can make with a very high degree of confidence purely looking at search behavior. So things like whether someone's likely to repay a loan based on their social circles and their network, what level of health the person might be in by how much walking or traveling they do in a given day, This one I found was a little bit disconcerting. This one says, pregnant but doesn't know it yet. So a true story is, again, the ability to predict or identify pregnancy before the person who is pregnant knows they're pregnant, just by changes in online search habits. So what we're getting is this vast ocean of data. It's getting a lot more granular, and we're able to see closer and closer to the point that a decision's made. And where this can be leveraged in supply chain is predictive analytics. So seen some examples of Amazon using this to pre-position inventory based on past purchasing behavior. And so this is around making sure the product's available and responsive, and at the same time is cost optimized in terms of its deployment of the network. Now that's all well and good in terms of that idea of these kind of rapid response, real-time, immediate supply chains. On the other hand, those supply chains are getting longer. So we've got import, global sourcing, right down to last mile fulfillment now. They're more complex in the sense that we have more sourcing channels, we have more fulfillment channels, and more customer channels than we've ever had. It's getting more fragmented in the sense that product proliferation has increased exponentially. And at the same time, there's this demand for rapid innovation in ranges, the change. So those are some of the challenges. I guess in respect of that, our view is that clarity, integration, and alignment become more and more important. And this is just a model that we use to look at supply chains. And where I'd focus is on the top where it says business strategy, customer value proposition, and supply chain strategy. So the idea being that these three things need to be quite tightly interrelated and linked in making decisions in the future because, for example, the business strategy, where we're going to play, what products we're in, our basis of competition, what the customer needs to get or offer will have a direct impact on the supply chain and the supply chain strategy and then the cost base. So a reasonably simple example of that would be a retail business that has a retail store offer, but also has an online offer, and the online offer has a much greater range in the store. So the question is, do we actually stock that in the store, because that has inventory implications, or do we hold the extended range in a central facility? But then what's the customer offer around that? What if I order something that's stocked in the store and in the central facility? Do I get those shipped? Do I get two different shipments? Do I get one shipment? What's the timing around that, and so on? And it sounds simple, but on the other hand, that can have a big implication on what the actual network looks like and what the cost base is. So if we see that, well, if we do that, that's going to be a little too expensive, we might need to go back and tweak the customer offer. A business that I think did this really well, it's an old example, but IKEA is one that said, well, we'd like to offer a broad range of good quality furniture at a reasonable price. And so what they really did is combined the warehouse and the store into one, so it kind of collapsed the whole supply chain network. Flat packed everything, so they took a lot of the excess capacity out of the shipping cost, and then turned the customer into a picker and assembler and a delivery person, and in my case, typically quite a poor assembler, so then I'd call somebody and just deal with the shame of not knowing how to put the thing together and just get it done. But a good example of a business that did that. And then what we then have to have is we have to have capability that delivers around that, which is around the people, processes, and systems. And again, there's a real opportunity to get that right. So what I'd like to do now is look at some of the areas where supply chain's evolving, and then look to see where we can find those sources of competitive advantage. So the first one we'll look at is the sourcing complexity. So I think we actually heard a really great example of that already this morning from Ido. So globalization, it's real. It's added a lot of complexity into procurement and logistics. We've got increased product proliferation, we've got longer lead times, greater fragmentation of suppliers, and then more degree of freedom in terms of what we do where. So we have offshore consolidation, we could do that now. So again, there's an opportunity or not to combine the logistics task with the procurement offering, say in an offshore economy, and then we can make decisions about where we allocate. Do we do that offshore or back onshore? And I'll give you some examples of that. But there's just a lot more options. And we also need more visibility and predictability around that. And what we're saying, and we think this is going to be a source of a competitive advantage into the future, is tighter integration between procurement and supply chain. So I guess there's always been a link, but at the risk of oversimplifying, it's been somewhat linear. It's kind of been a 1-2. So procurement's about, and again, I apologize for oversimplifying this for those who are in procurement in the room, But again, it's really around trying to get a better result in terms of gross margin, getting the product at a lower cost. Now, there's a whole lot more to that, but just stick with the example for the moment, where supply chain has really typically been more focused on cost to serve. So if you take those two things together, it actually creates a net margin result for the business. So you've seen businesses that have put in place an import sourcing strategy as a way of improving gross margin. But if we don't have a really close look at the supply chain and the flow paths and flow models, there's a risk that a reduction or an improvement in gross margin can be eroded by increase in cost to serve costs. Yeah, does that make sense? So the idea is that we need to kind of look at this together. And so where this might come into play is you might have consolidation opportunities in offshore locales. So rather than looking at things based on which supplier gives me the lowest cost for a particular unit, but what's the volume of with a group of suppliers in a specific region, and then how do I consolidate out of that region, looking at port of origin opportunities and so on, and also looking at value-added processes. What things can I do there as opposed to here that can reduce some of the costs? And so again, we might trade off saying, well, this supplier is a little bit more expensive than this one, but I'd rather have all my suppliers in this particular region because I can consolidate volumes. I've got a bit more control. I've got a bit more visibility, whereas I could spread it across 4 different locales, and that would be at a lower unit cost, but if I had the supply chain cost, it would actually be more expensive. So here's this was a real example of an organization we did some work with on this. They, again, were looking at increasing the level of imports, but part of it was looking at 4 different flow models. So this was for, again, a retail business, and the idea was, well, one option is to actually have pallets prepared offshore, and then have those go directly into the store. So that's actually a low-cost model because we're actually bypassing facility costs. A lot of the labor is happening offshore. It's also a high-risk model as well because we've actually increased the lead time from source of supply to store to the full lead time. Does that make sense? So I have to allocate maybe 8 weeks in advance where this stuff's going to go. So there's an inventory risk around that. And again, I generally don't like to do these sorts of things in presentations because there's no one-size-fits-all answer to these. But in general, what we found in doing the analysis is that this model worked pretty well for sort of opportunity buys, one-time buys, and seasonal products that were kind of a once-off. Then you had cross-dock and flow-through models where, again, the allocation decision was still deferred. It was still deferred, but it was made a little bit later in the chain. That made sense. So this is kind of a medium cost, medium risk option, and because you're postponing the decision about where the inventory goes. It works pretty well for higher volume, short lead time items, whereas then we move to model 4, which is put away or a DC-based model. That works quite well for our slow-moving, long lead time items, and away we go. So, but this was done across each of the different types of products that they were looking to import to work out which flow path worked best for those items, because there wasn't any one flow path that was going to work well for all those items, because they had quite different product characteristics. And that's something we'll touch on in the next bit, which is, you know, the kind of competitive edge and cost advantage these days is getting more and more about the dimension and profile of the product itself, because it's the product, the characteristics of the product in some cases is what causes it to incur cost in a certain way in the supply chain. You know, so a packet of pens will be very different than a kayak, for example. So then we look at the distribution center, and over the last couple of decades, we've seen a lot of technology investment in the distribution center. So WMS, RFID, and some robotics and automation. And this has reduced the labor costs, resulted in some savings. At the same time, allowed us to increase in scale. But we think really, if you look at what's happening, likely to happen in the future, it's really now based on product profiles. So it's not so much volume, but it's volume by product type, because automation being a cost driver into the future, we have to be really careful and clear about what sort of technology we're investing in for the logistics task at hand. And so the pictures below give you a couple different options. The Kiva robot systems, which are what we call a goods-to-person type arrangement, really good for each picks. And what I'll do is I'll just show you a quick video of what they do and how they work. And this is in an Alibaba facility, and hoping this works. And then we put that in contrast with automated retrieval systems like conveyors. So the Kiva robot's really good for each picks, but one thing you might notice, they don't use the height or cube of the facility particularly well, right? So that's one of the disadvantages, whereas your retrieval or conveyor systems, automated retrieval conveyor systems, tend not to be quite as flexible, but they do give you a better cube utilization or height utilization. So it is horses for courses. One of the challenges we have in Australia, though, is that A, it's not a particularly big economy in the first place, and secondly, there is more fragmentation. So a lot of the work we've done, particularly in the retail space around this, is it seems to be hard to make a business case to invest in these kinds of technologies ahead of the curve. So that's been a challenge. So what we're seeing now is some of the 3PLs coming to market with kind of aggregated industry solutions. So this is the new toll facility in Western Sydney, a $160 million facility with $50 million invested in automation technology. And I guess if you look at the way kind of customer 3PL relationships worked in the past, it was very much focused on a relationship with the customer. We'd like to take your business. Our view is what's likely to evolve in the future is that it's going to be more product-based, product specialized, because the investment decisions will be driven by automation. Is that where the cost savings will be? So it'll be aggregation more around product profiles as opposed to the customer. So we think that might be the next level of specialization within that industry. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the opportunities around integration of procurement and supply chain strategy. We've talked a bit around how technology is evolving in the distribution center given the change in the logistics task. There's also a change in the distribution footprint itself. What doesn't change is that there's still that frontier between responsiveness and efficiency. So responsiveness being how quickly can we service the customer, efficiency being at what cost. And again, depending on what markets you play and what competitive strategy you have, that will differ. But the thing is, there is a lot more fragmentation, more channels, so understanding the cost to serve for the different customer segments is really important, because then we can set things up in a way that makes sense around restructuring the distribution networks and transportation modes, for example, maybe introducing tiered pricing structures for different levels of responsiveness, and also being really clear on order fulfillment, so that, for example, if we're placing one order, we don't end up kind of chewing up the margin by having to service that from multiple locations and incurring 3x the lots of transport costs than we anticipated. So that becomes really important from the fulfillment piece. Just as an example of something that we've seen that's now becoming more prevalent is something called a dark store. Usually they're in high density areas. What it is, it's a store and a DC, and it's neither at the same time. So it's kind of like a store in the sense that it's laid out oftentimes like a store is laid out, because it's supposed to pick up each picks or the sort of picking profiles that you get for online ordering. So it's set up in that way, but it's a dark store in the sense that it doesn't trade, but it's actually set up, again, to meet the demands of each picks in the online market. Again, it has the responsiveness profile of a store, so it's very close to the customer. DCs aren't generally set up for each picks, whereas this is set up for those sorts of each picks. So again, you can see how the advent of something like this might start changing kind of the traditional view of, kind of the DCs servicing, metro locations and so on, and maybe something that's a bit more consolidated with more of these out there in the field. But again, it depends on what business you're in, what your order profiles are like, and so on. And we think these will become more prevalent in the future, but especially in the high-density metro areas. Okay? But what's becoming increasingly apparent is that we can't make network optimization and inventory optimization decisions in isolation anymore. So the idea is, one is around availability. So what products are we going to have and how much are we going to carry? That, just by saying that, I kind of think, well, that should probably influence something around my distribution infrastructure. And there's the responsiveness question as well, which is where do I want to have that relative to the customer? So just sort of talking through that, if I understand that I have different product profiles, different customer segments, and I have a different offer on my inventory, then the network structure and flows and my inventory picture, those need to be informed by each other. So again, it doesn't work to do those in isolation any longer. All right, and then the last one, which is, this is the sexy bit, the reinvention of the last mile, and I think it's kind of fun because I think it's creating an opportunity to really look at supply chains in a fundamentally different way than we have. So a couple of points around last mile delivery is just to keep in mind that it's day one, that I'm not sure which solutions or technologies will prevail, but it's a great opportunity to try some things out. What we're seeing is the fragmentation is prompting a required step change in capability, which we've discussed. Strategic partnerships are redefining convenience, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a moment. Last mile delivery is a real opportunity to step up in customer experience, and I'll show you a little video around a business in the US that I think is doing what I would say is something similar to what IKEA did with furniture. And again, there's a lot of interesting innovations out there we can have a look at, so I'll show you a couple now.
Zero is the first online marketplace in Switzerland. What we see is that new delivery services are demanded by the customer. You must be able to deliver a product when the customer is requesting it. Once the customer ordered, the parcel got packed at the merchant and then it's mounted below the drone. The drone will fly autonomously to the landing positions and hand the product over to the van. And then the last mile transportation is done by the van.
The logistics challenges arise in that last mile delivery when vehicles get caught up in city traffic. And this is what causes delays, unreliability, and of course costs. And these are the types of challenges that we believe that we can solve by combining the Mercedes-Benz vans together with the Matternet drone.
Okay, so an interesting one. So using basically the drones to get through the really dense areas and the vans for that last bit of the last mile, which also means the customer experience could be a bit better as well than a robot landing there, just dropping something off and taking back off. And here's another technology that's being trialed.
Volvo in-car delivery is a service which, via a digital key, allows consumers to take delivery of goods direct to their cars. Once the delivery is complete, the owner is alerted via an SMS or email. The digital key then ceases to exist.
Okay, so there's another 20 videos we could look at that have different solutions. There's some great stuff out there. But again, I don't know which of these things is going to, again, prevail or which ones will prevail, but there are definitely some things being trialed and looked at. The question then comes down to is how can I execute on a national delivery offer both profitably and competitively? So if I have an online order, that might be a delivery method. So it could be same day, next day, 3 to 5 business days, for example. Or if it's click and collect, I could pick that up in a store, maybe a partner store pickup, or I could use a partnership with a convenience channel, for example, to do that. And I think what all this is doing is kind of changing the focus from, I guess, the previous model, which said, how do I fit my day into the supply chain? So in other words, I need to get to an Australia Post outlet to pick up my goods before a certain time. I need to go to the store before it closes. I need to be there to take delivery. To really one now where it says, how can the supply chain fit into my day? So if my day looks something like I wake up, I'm not sure I've done that yet today, morning coffee, fill up the car with petrol, is that if I look at that then, well, there's over 22,000 locations where I can get my coffee, and there's over 6,700 locations where I can fill up the car. And then I do school drop-off, commute to work via the train, and do my grocery shopping. Again, lots of other locations there. So these are all points at which we could interact with the customer, and really following their day. And again, this is a shift in terms of what the future might look like in supply chain. So pretty exciting. And just lastly, I'll show you one more little video. This is a business called Enjoy in the US. I think it's a great example of a business that is understanding its customer experience and its product profile and came up with a strategy to deliver that's pretty exciting. So I'll play the video and come back and we'll just talk about what it is.
There's an entirely new way to buy the world's best tech products. It's called Enjoy.
When you buy from Enjoy, the world's coolest tech products come to you.
You don't have to wait for those crazy lines at the stores, and you don't have to wait for a delivery man.
First, you get fast and free hand delivery, wherever and whenever you like. You can get it as soon as 4 hours. And your product isn't dropped off by a delivery man.
It's hand delivered to you by an Enjoy expert, like me.
Like me.
Like me.
But we're specifically trained in all the new gear, and we'll spend an hour with you and teach you everything you need to know about your product.
So instead of fumbling with the manual,
We'll connect all of your devices.
You'll be shooting your next GoPro movie.
Or jamming out to your new Sonos.
or flying your new drone, all within an hour.
We call this an enjoy visit.
But you might just call it amazing.
And the most amazing part of it all of this, fast delivery and expert help,
It's all free.
So why wouldn't you buy from Enjoy?
So we talked about IKEA before, how they kind of collapsed the supply chain. You know, they sort of combined the warehouse and the store. So here's a business that effectively has taken the store out. So rather than training up the store staff, they're training up the distribution staff. I think a pretty clear understanding of the customer requirements. So again, they're very much fitting into their customers' days. We'll come to you. We'll help you get this stuff set up. We'll spend an hour with you, get that all done. So it's a very convenient, very high value, very customizable type offer. And again, they've taken an entire step of the supply chain out and have focused their efforts there. So again, it just shows there's some opportunities to sort of redefine how we meet the customer, which is pretty exciting. So in closing, I just wanted to wrap this up by saying that now when we're looking at supply chain strategy and design, there is a bit more to think about, because we're thinking about everything from offshore consolidation and fulfillment, multiple flow paths, this kind of mix of availability and responsiveness, network and inventory, and also what's the customer experience look like at the end. And we've got different products incurring cost in different ways across the supply chain. So it does mean we have to take a broader view, I think get more integrated around this idea of the business strategy, the customer offer, the supply chain strategy, and sometimes we have to iterate those things. You know, well, that looks good, except that's going to be quite expensive, or that won't work. So what can we go back and tweak and get that to line up? So in summary, there's a population and data explosion at an exponential scale. You know, we've heard in this presentation, also the one before, that supply chains are longer, more complex, and more fragmented. This idea to integrate business strategy, customer offer, and supply chain strategy is key. And again, I think that's my view on that at the moment, is that's still generally done in kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch way. It's the business strategy, customer offer, and then supply chain sorts it out. But we really need to start getting into a process of that being more of a feedback loop as opposed to a straight line. There's a real opportunity to get it right. So with that understanding, it can be a big source of competitive advantage. And I think there was talk in the last presentation about the strategic inflection point. I'd agree, the time is ripe for creativity and innovation in that space. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.